Welcome to meeting number 44 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to a request from 4 members of the committee, we are meeting to discuss the logistics of the committee testimony of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, Craig Kielburger, Mark Kielburger, former WE Board Chair Michelle Douglas, and the CFO of WE, Victor Lai, including but not limited to the panels they will appear on and the length of their respective testimony. So that's the purpose of today's meeting. And just I would point out to members, I think they've all received the contribution agreement that the Clerk of the Privy Council agreed to provide, and we have put notices out on the meeting for tomorrow and the meeting with the Prime Minister and a separate panel for the Chief of Staff on Thursday, but that is, as you know, subject to change. Did I see your hand up, Peter Fragiskatis?
I do, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if you weren't just finished yet, but I do have a motion to put forward.
Okay, just to, I'll take your motion, but because we are at video conference, make sure you kind of wave. I've got a very small screen here. Go ahead, Mr. Fragiskatis, what's your motion?
Thank you very much. Since we are meeting to discuss the logistics of witnesses and future meetings, the motion does relate to that, and it says as follows: that the chair be empowered to schedule meetings with the witnesses listed in the request for today's meeting as the chair deems appropriate as per the availability of witnesses.
Can you, I only got about 7 words of that down, Mr. Fragiskatis. Can you read it slower, and then I have Mr. Polyev on next. Read it slower and then present your reasoning, and we'll go to Mr. Polyev.
Happy to go slower. That the chair be empowered to schedule meetings with the witnesses listed in the request for today's meeting as the chair deems appropriate as per the availability of witnesses. And as to the reasoning, Mr. Chair, I think it's self-explanatory. I think this allows for the best approach in terms of organizing future meetings, leaving it in your hands and the hands of those who help organize meetings. On the clerk's side, I think would be quite useful.
Okay, motions on the floor. Mr. Polyev and anybody else, just put your hand up. Mr. Polyev, your mute's on, Pierre.
To be clear, Mr. Chair, I hate to ruin your momentary flattery, but Mr. Fragiskatis' motion does not empower you to do anything. If you look at the wording, it says subject to the availability of the witnesses. So effectively, it empowers them to decide when they come and for how long. We've never done that before. That's completely unprecedented, where we just say, hey, a witness can come whenever he wants and for however long he wants. That is, so this motion would be unprecedented in my 16 years in Parliament. Now, we can haggle over it all we want, but here's the bottom line. The Kielburgers are coming for 4 hours. They may come tomorrow for 4 hours, or the Liberals on the committee might choose to talk us through the night. But the opposition has a majority, and we are going to compel sufficient testimony to get the answers. So if Liberals want to talk out the clock, as they've done in other committees, in order for the witnesses to only appear for an hour tomorrow, an hour and a half or something like that, that's fine. We'll just invite them back again, and maybe a third time, so that we get an accumulative period to cover the questions that need answering. Right now, the Kielburgers are offering to come for, I think originally it was an hour, now it's an hour and a half. Once you've had a couple of opening statements, you burn through that in no time. This is a massive undertaking. We need to ask a lot of questions. And so there's no chance that we're going to allow an hour and a half hearing for 2 witnesses of this who are so quintessential to the discussion. I understand, I've heard that they want to include a third witness now who would, in those proceedings. That would then burn up a tremendous amount of time in opening statements alone. So that's obviously not acceptable to the official opposition. I won't speak for the other two opposition parties, but I suspect it's not acceptable to them either. So we do need to have the Kielburgers for at least 4 hours tomorrow. And if the government wants to finagle a procedural trick to prevent that from happening, then we'll have to invite the Kielburgers back for more testimony later on.
So I take it you're speaking against that motion. Who's next on the speaking list? Is there anyone? Mr. Julian. If I don't catch us, folks, yell at me because this computer, you're looking pretty small. Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I actually had some technical problems. So if you could read the motion that Mr. Fradiskatos has presented before I make my comments.
I'll ask Mr. Fradiskatos to read it again. My notes are just so-so. Mr. Fradiskatos, read the motion again, please.
Sure, happy to. It says as follows, that the chair be empowered to schedule meetings with the witnesses listed in the request for today's meeting as the chair deems appropriate as per the availability of witnesses.
Mr. Julian.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do think that it takes away from your power rather than adds to it. I think there are a lot of questions that people have. There's no doubt that as information has trickled out about this this controversy, more questions have come to light. And I certainly think that we require more time to ask the questions, both of folks involved with WE, but also of government officials. I'm just thinking about at least a dozen different subject areas, something that can't be covered in an hour and a half. There is absolutely no doubt of that. So I think it's up to this committee to step forward and provide the leadership and the majority of the committee to make the decision about how much time that we require with witnesses to ask them the appropriate questions and to get the information that Canadians are looking for. My final point is this, Mr. Chair. We saw with the SNC-Lavalin scandal that the Ethics Committee was shut down. At the time, it was a majority parliament. There was a majority on the committee, and they basically refused to have hearings, refused to allow testimony that people had been willing to bring forward. So Canadians didn't get all the information that they require. In a democracy, it's important that we know anything good the government's doing, anything bad the government's doing. There's that democratic right to transparency. And we now have a minority parliament. And a minority in this committee, no one party can decide how we are to proceed. I'd prefer to see a consensus around it, but I think we're best served, Mr. Chair, if the committee provides the direction and the chair then is able, once we've provided that direction, to work out. There's still a lot of logistical things. There's still a lot of organizational things that we give to you, Mr. Chair, in an effort to work out. But we need to put in place what are the broad guidelines, what are the answers that we're seeking on behalf of committee and on behalf of the committee, on behalf of Canadians. And in that respect, then, I would be voting against Mr. Fradiskatos' motion. Thank you.
Okay, then we do have a motion on the floor, and just a heads up to Mr. Polyev, your mic is down a little low, so you'll have to raise it next time you're on, if you could. Did I see your hand up, Mr. Fraser? Okay, Mr. Fraser.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to those who've intervened on the motion so far. I don't think there's a huge problem with the time at which the Kielburgers testify. 4 hours seems a bit excessive to me. We haven't had any witnesses that have gone anywhere near that long. I would suggest maybe this will be a friendly amendment, Mr. Fradiskatos, and others. I don't know if this will cause you to support it or not. I'm happy to have this discussion. But if the issue is around as per the availability of the witnesses. Perhaps could I propose, I just jotted some language down to say that the chair be empowered to schedule meetings with the witnesses listed in the request for today's meeting as the chair deems appropriate, as opposed to as the availability of the witnesses. I forget the exact language Mr. Fragiscatos used. This is not a big or important issue to me in terms of the availability of the witnesses. 4 hours seems unprecedented in terms of what this committee has dealt with before. But if we wanted to negotiate a bit more time that stayed within the reasonable bounds of what the committee has done before, I'd be quite happy to entertain that discussion.
Okay, then we do, Madam Clerk, is that amendment in order? Then on the amendment and the exact words, if you could give them to me again, Mr. Fraser, and then we'll see if there's any further discussion on the amendment. We'll vote on the amendment and go back to the original motion and see if we can come to a consensus on witnesses.
I'm not sure if it requires a vote on the amendment if the original mover is okay with it, but in any event, the proposed...
Well, let's ask Mr. Fragiscatos, is you okay with the proposal there? Is it a friendly amendment, Peter?
It is a friendly amendment,
Okay.
yes.
So, and look, if the issue is not the availability, I'm happy to have that chat. But the proposed language I've got here is that the chair be empowered to schedule meetings with the witnesses listed in the request for today's meeting as the chair deems appropriate. The motivation for the change was to try to address Mr. Poilievre's concern about yielding power to the witnesses' availability. In this case, we'll empower squarely the chair, who will figure out what is appropriate. Again, the time of the witness issue is, if we want to extend it a bit, that's fine. It does seem over the top to have 4 hours, but look, we'll have this conversation.
Okay, and I seen Mr. Poilievre. Pierre, put your mic up, like that. Your mic on your head there. That's better. Thanks.
Good.
Go ahead.
You
Floor
can hear me
yours.
all right?
Yep.
You can
No.
hear me all right now?
It was the translators who were having a bit of problem there. You're okay there.
All right. Again, with respect, Mr. Chair, you had originally scheduled the Kielburgers for an hour. That's obviously unacceptable. So the committee is the master of its own domain, and the chair serves the committee. Committee believes it needs 4 hours, then the committee needs 4 hours. So that's as simple as it is. And to have the witnesses effectively dictate through the chair how much time they're prepared to testify is not how we do business. If committee members are unhappy with how scheduling and timing of witnesses works, they have the power to vote accordingly, and I implore the committee to do that here. Thank you.
Okay, then I'm going to go to the question on this motion, Madam Clerk.
Did we want to do a recorded vote then for
Yes,
this one?
we'll have to do a recorded vote. I don't think there's any other way on this system.
And we're voting without any kind of amendment. We're just voting on the motion as worded by Mr. Fraser, just to be clear.
We're voting on the motion with the new wording by Mr. Fraser, a friendly amendment, yes.
Perfect, just to be clear for the record. So let's go then on with the vote. Ms. Derowitz.
You're muted.
Yes. Great. Mr. Fragiscatos.
Yes.
Mr. Fraser.
Yes.
Ms. Koutrakis.
Yes.
Mr. McLeod.
Yes.
Mr. Poilievre.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
No.
Mr. Cumming.
No.
Mr. Morant.
No.
Mr. Sainte-Marie.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
Je suis contre moi aussi.
I'm also against.
I'm also against.
Motion.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, motion is lost. Can we then come back? Okay, go ahead. The floor is yours, Mr. Poilievre.
I have a motion that Craig Kielburger and Mark Kielburger appear for no less than 4 hours on Tuesday, July 28th.
Okay. Just a suggestion. Do we need to go to motions, or can we try and achieve consensus? I guess the motion's on the floor. We'll go with the motion. Motion's moved by Pierre that the Kielburgers on their own, Pierre, just the Kielburgers and not
That's right.
Victor Lai,
That's right.
appear for 4 hours. Mr. Fraser.
Sure. Thank you, Pierre and Mr. Chair. As I said before, I'm not really too fussy about this. Just from a logistical point of view, I believe there's other witnesses from We Charity. Are they intended to be part of the same panel, or what does this do to the anticipated schedule of existing witnesses or others that have been proposed?
This motion seeks to have the Kielburgers alone for 4 hours. And then as for the other witnesses, they can, the committee clerk and the chair can work to fit them in. The good news is tomorrow we have lots of time. There's only, the meeting starts at 2 and there's nothing the meeting starts at noon, excuse me, and then there's nothing after that. So we can just extend the length of the meeting to include other witness testimony.
For members' information, what went out in the notice was 12-1 as an individual. Michelle Douglas, former chair of the board of directors of WE, Canadian Federation of Students, Nicole Brianis, deputy chairman. That's the first hour. And in the notice was 1 to 2:30 for an hour and a half. Craig and Mark Kielburger and Victor Lai.
If I can just clarify, Mr. Chair, that the Federation of Students has now declined. They will no longer be participating, just to clarify.
Okay, that's good. So what Mr. Poilievre's motion would do would move it from 1 to 5 Ottawa time, correct, Pierre?
That's right.
Okay, and then we'll have to deal with Victor Lai some other way. Okay, so it's on the floor, Mr. Fraser.
Sure, and look, I don't even know that we're going to end up needing a vote on this. I hope we'll be able to achieve some kind of consensus. For what it's worth, Mr. Poilievre, my concern is really one around scheduling as much as anything. We've got some things going on tomorrow in Nova Scotia, including the return of the HMCS Fredericton. One of my neighbors lost a child during the helicopter incident, and then there's some additional personal and professional scheduling things in the afternoon. There's no attempt to be tricky. I want to assure you I'm not trying to pull some stunt. I just want to make sure that we have the ability to be there. Is there going to be any requirement, Mr. Chair, of the other witnesses from We, not with CFS, who are going to be there? Like, are they Ottawa based? And I guess it's teleconference, so it won't matter much. Is this something from just a logistical point of view you think is going to be easy to sort out from the committee's perspective?
I don't know. The clerk would have more information on that. She's been in discussions with the Kielburgers. They initially requested to appear for an hour. So, Madam Clerk, I don't know if you can add anything to that.
When I spoke to them today to see if they had more availability, they were only available for 1.5 hours. If the committee chooses for 4, I will send that request their way, and we'll see whether or not they can meet that. I won't know until I check with them.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. McLeod.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to ask Mr. Poilievre why he feels we should add 3 more hours to the presentation on top of the 1 hour that was previously planned.
The answer is that we have a lot of questions. This is an extraordinary circumstance. We have an organization that has given over $300,000 in benefits to the Prime Minister's family, $41,000 in free travel to the Finance Minister's family, given jobs to members of the Finance Minister's family, and in exchange,
and it's going to take 4 hours to ask that.
Extraordinary benefits from the public treasury, got extraordinary access to Parliament Hill on one of the most coveted days of the year to have that access, that had received, saw its contributions from the government rise tenfold under the government, and received a $500 million contribution agreement, very unusual contribution agreement. So yeah, and it's an organization that is facing many questions. So we think it's appropriate to call and have all those questions answered.
I see Ms. Zerowitz has her hand up.
I think Mr. Fragiskakis was before me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I didn't see him. We'll go with you first anyway.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
go with Ms. Zerowitz and then Mr. Fragiskakis.
Thank you. So I have if the Kielburgers are available tomorrow for 4 hours, I think that's fine. My question is, if they're not available, do we just take them for an hour and a half tomorrow, and then we have to find another time for them? And would it be this week or when they are next available? How does that work?
I guess that would be a matter of discussion between the clerk and the Kielburgers to see how much time they could avail themselves tomorrow, and we'd have to make up the difference at another time. I mean, the committee has they would know this. The committee has the power of subpoena if we need to go that far. We don't. We would hope we don't have to. Mr. Fragiskakis. So I think it'd be a matter of discussion, Julie, between the clerk and the Kielburgers. Mr. Fragiskakis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It was actually on that point. I worry that we're going to end up going in circles here. I think you've heard already that there isn't great opposition to the idea that the Kielburgers come and testify beyond the time that was originally set out. But we don't know their availability. And so we can debate all day about whether or not 4 hours is appropriate. I personally don't have a problem with it, like Mr. Fraser. And again, I haven't heard any opposition from the Liberal side. My Liberal colleagues seem to be for that. But I have a tough time seeing how we're going to get anywhere without knowing their schedule. Perhaps a way forward here is to allow tomorrow's meeting set for an hour and a half to continue as scheduled. And then we can see either in the meantime or at tomorrow's meeting whether or not they being the Kielburgers, can stay for 4 hours, or what to do if that's not possible. Otherwise, we're just going to end up wasting our time here.
Okay, could I suggest this? Could we see what their availability is tomorrow, Madam Clerk? And if we could at least get a minimum of 2 hours tomorrow and then another 2 hours later this week, would that be acceptable to them, to Mr. Poilievre's proposal? And we would on Victor Eli, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, Eli, Chief Financial Officer. What are we talking about on time for him? That it had to be a separate a panel another day, likely.
That would have to be another day. You know, I listen. I don't know what the Mr. Kielburger would have in their schedule that would be more important right now. Perhaps they're very busy, but it is extraordinary to me that they wouldn't that they'd have something more important than testifying before a parliamentary committee that is looking into a scandal that has gripped the nation regarding a $500 million now canceled contribution agreement for which 2 ministers, including the Prime Minister, have admitted a conflict of interest. I think something of that enormity would merit their time. I don't know if they have, you know, some other engagement they had planned. Perhaps they could reschedule it for the Parliament of Canada. And as for 4 hours, I mean, I remember Jody Wilson-Raybould testified for, I think it was more than 4 hours, and was grilled by Liberal members who had no problem keeping her before committee that length of time. So it's strange that they are now concerned about such a time frame for the Kielburger brothers. So I don't want to have to do a subpoena, but I will if necessary. We do have that power, and they're going to have to testify for the 4 hours at least. they might as well get it done tomorrow.
Okay, I think that's well known, Mr. Fraser.
Yeah, I don't think we're at a subpoena stage yet either, and we seem to be for something there doesn't seem to be big disagreement on. We seem to be talking in circles. May I propose that you invite them for 4 hours tomorrow, and if they're for whatever reason not available, we split it up and do 2 hours tomorrow and 2 hours on Wednesday as an alternative. But make the pitch for 4 hours tomorrow, and if that works, great.
Excellent.
Okay.
I can live with that.
Okay, then we're agreed on that. Mr. Julian, did you have your hand up, or were you just moving around?
I did have my hand up, Mr. Chair, but I think Mr. Fraser actually voiced what I was thinking, that if we've got a consensus, then that's a consensus of the committee, and we move on.
Okay, that is great. And the clerk will ask the Kielburgers if they can appear for 4 hours tomorrow, and if they can't, 2 hours tomorrow and 2 the next day. On Victor Lai, what are you proposing there? Because we'll take him off the list for tomorrow. And another proposal, I guess I'm turning to you, Mr. Polyev.
I think that Mr. Lee, by the way, I do believe the pronunciation is Lee.
Okay, thank you.
I could be wrong. If I am mistaken, I apologize to the gentleman. But I will refer to him as Mr. Lee until otherwise corrected. I don't think it's appropriate for him to be on the same panel as the Kielburgers. What I would suggest is that perhaps we look at this for at the end of the week, or perhaps next week. But we do need at this point, unless something changes, to have him appear. I think it would be important to have him for at least a couple of hours.
Okay, then can we try, and the clerk and I will try and schedule that in for this week for Mr. Lee. I believe your pronunciation is correct. Everybody's pronunciation is better than mine.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Mr. McLeod.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think the clerk had notified us that the Canadian Federation of Students had withdrawn. And does that leave a slot open in that area? Is that time frame enough?
We had Michelle Douglas and the Canadian Federation of Students for an hour. I think Mr. Polyev is requesting Mr. Lee be longer than that, I believe.
That's right.
So it would likely have to be another day. Okay, we okay on that? Okay, where are we now?
All right, so that is, I think we have an understanding on Mr. Kielburger and Mr. Lee. Moving now to
Mr. Chair. Sorry,
yes.
Mr. Chair, I did have my hand. I don't want to
have another motion.
Oh, sorry, Pierre, I did miss Mr. Fragiskatis before. Go ahead, Peter.
So to Mr. to Michael's point, to Mr. McLeod's point, we have a slot that is opened. That would allow for significant time with Mr. Lee. Why is it that Mr. Polyev doesn't want to entertain that? It's not as if Mr. Lee would be coming for 10 or 15 minutes. It'd be a significant time with the witness, not during the time of Craig and Mark Kielburger. I have never been opposed to this committee looking at issues around We Charity. I think that the matters that have arisen in the past few weeks do merit examination. But the more we call for more and more meetings, that means that we are away from our constituents. That means that we are away as MPs from dealing with the central issue of the day, which is COVID-19 and the economic response on the part of the federal government. Why we would continue to schedule more meetings when we have an opportunity tomorrow to put in a witness and examine and ask questions of that witness, be effective in our role, is really beyond me. I'm surprised, and I think you've heard Liberal members throughout make it clear that we are willing to entertain the ideas of the opposition. When we've put reasonable questions and ideas forward, they are time and time again cast aside. there's an opening tomorrow. I think Mr. Lee can be fit into that opening, with all due
Okay,
respect to Mr.
I'll take Mr. Cooper on this point and then back to Mr. Polyev, because go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And very simply, in response to Mr. Fragiskatos, there is insufficient time. Mr. Lee is a key player. He is the CFO of a number of we-controlled organizations. And it's imperative that we have sufficient time to ask him questions. We have the Kielburgers, hopefully, tomorrow for 4 hours. I anticipate that there will be issues arising from their testimony that will be relevant in the case of Mr. Lee. And so I really don't understand why this is difficult. I think the manner in which we're proceeding to have him on another day so that we can have a full examination of him and sufficient time to ask him questions is important, because again, he is a key player.
Okay, then I'm going back to Mr. Fragiskatos, and then I believe we're going to try and move ahead. Mr. Fragiskatos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We pretend, or some of us were pretending, as if Finance is the only committee looking at this matter. It is also being examined by the Ethics Committee. I know that Government Operations is also going to be beginning in short order looking at this as well. So if the opposition is looking to bring witnesses forward, and to, if they're upset about what we on the Liberal side have suggested as far as possible times where witnesses could speak, keep in mind, I remind my colleagues very respectfully, that other committees are examining these issues and can call whichever witnesses they want. Again, not opposed to us continuing to spend some time here looking at issues around we. Obviously, we're going to be doing that this week, but it makes no sense not to invite Mr. Lee tomorrow for an hour in the place of the students who have pulled out.
Mr. Julian.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, Mr. Fragiskatos is referencing the Ethics Committee, and we know that the Ethics Committee has been filibustered now for the last few days. So they've been unable to move forward. Liberals on the committee are blocking the committee's work, which is really unfortunate, because we saw the same thing in SNC-Lavalin. In a minority parliament, all parties do have to work together. I think we've done that by having the 4-hour request to the Kielburgers. That's important. I think Mr. Lee will probably have a lot of substantive questions coming his way. It would seem to me most appropriate to have the Kielburgers tomorrow and then have Mr. Lee subsequently. But as this information comes out, and there's been so many contradictions, it's hard to keep up. I think having the measured in-depth questioning that we'll have tomorrow will then help to form questions that we may want to ask eventually of Mr. Lee.
Okay, I'm going to take it that there is agreement that we hear from Mr. Lee separately for 2 hours on Wednesday. I do think it's probably important to have the We Charity complete before we hear from the Prime Minister. And we know the Prime Minister is appearing on Thursday. All right. Is there any? So that's.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just
Madam Clerk?
interject? Mr. Lee's lawyer did contact the committee and state that he was only available on Tuesday at the time indicated that the committee scheduled him for. So I will let him know, but I just want the committee to be aware that if he is unable to make it on Wednesday, that's been communicated to me in that letter by the lawyer, just so you're aware.
Okay, Mr. Polyev. Thank you for that, Carolyn. Mr. Polyev.
J'aurais un point aussi après.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Mr. Polyev and then Mr. St. Marie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Madam Clerk. I think if Mr. Lee cannot attend on Wednesday, then we can just bump him to the next week and continue the hearings at that time, or at a future date for the allotted period of time. I don't know if Peter Julian or a member of the block have views on the exact timing that Mr. Lee would appear. But if he doesn't want to do Wednesday, then he'll just we'll just bring him in another time.
Mr. St. Marie.
Yes. First of all, I agree with what Mr. Poiliev just said. I just want to remind you that there's the Ethics Committee that's sitting Wednesday from 11 to 3 p.m. and Thursday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So I think it would be important for the Finance Committee to not sit at the same time as the Ethics Committee. So that's a message for you, Mr. Chairman, as well as Madam Clerk.
Give me those times again, Gabriel.
Yes, Wednesday, it's from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and Thursday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Then we'll have to work around those times. Okay. Is there, okay, Julie, sorry, go ahead, Ms. Zerowitz.
Well, I think the Prime Minister, didn't they already put out a statement to indicate that they are coming in? He's coming in from 3 to 4 on Thursday and 4:15 to 5:15. So that's already happening. Already statement. It's, you know, so that's out public as much as I think everybody's trying to coordinate. But I think that's been scheduled. I just wanted to point that out. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just coming back to the clerk for a minute on Mr. Lee, was that the only time, through his lawyer, the only time he was available tomorrow during the 1 to 2:30 that we had him listed for?
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll have to, I guess we'll have to see where discussions.
In the meantime, I have already reached out to the Kilburgers, extending the invitation for 4 hours tomorrow. And I've stated in that if that doesn't work, that we would do 2 and 2. So I'm waiting to hear back from them at the moment, and I'll communicate with Mr. Lee as soon as you like about whichever proposal you prefer.
I do know other committees are meeting, but I do think it would be best in the chain of things to have the We Charity folks complete so that all the information is out there for any questions that people might have for the Prime Minister. But we'll see where that goes. Mr. Fraser.
Look, this is a bit of a tangential point, but nevertheless an important one to me. And I don't want to be small about these things, so I'll apologize in advance if it doesn't seem as significant to some of the matters at hand. Just in response to Mr. St. Marie's point about moving the committee times, on a personal and constituency level, one of the things I've really tried to do is plan to have certain meeting slots that have become routine for this committee in advance, so I can do the simple things we all do of meeting constituents, tending to the work that they would have us do, and personally, just with a young family, trying to pair up my own schedule with that of my wife's, who has her own career as well. If we can avoid, to the extent possible, changing with limited notice the time of that our committee meets, I would greatly appreciate it. There's a reason that we typically have a waiting period before notices will take effect and can be moved at the committee, even for this kind of a meeting that is outside of the ordinary course. So just as a favor, although if we must move things in this instance, I'll understand. But I would beg of the committee that we try not to make a habit of last-minute changes to the ordinary meeting times. Thank you.
Thank you for that point made. So I guess at the moment, then we will leave it up to the clerk to see what kind of responses we get back.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. McLeod.
Another question for clarity. We had scheduled 2 presentations for 12 till 1, or for the 1 hour period. One of the presenters has withdrawn. So are we cutting that time frame in half for the remaining presenter? Or can we move that presenter to present at the same time as Mr. Lee on Wednesday?
I guess I see a bit of difficulty in that, Mr. McLeod. In Michelle Douglas is former chair of the board of directors with the We Charity, and Mr. Lee is chief financial officer. If it's possible to bring the two of them together, that's fine with me for 2 hours.
Oh.
I don't. I just kind of see some maybe differences of opinion. Sometimes that's the good to
Well,
have on the floor of the
my
committee.
my point was I'm trying to avoid the marathon
Yeah.
day, but there was a slot with two presenters. Now we have one presenter with the same time frame. Should we shorten the time frame then?
We
No.
could do that, but I guess what I find from the chair's perspective that a second presenter would be 5 minutes more in terms of their presentation, and it really does take about 50 to 55 minutes to give all members, at least 8 members and sometimes 10, the opportunity to raise questions. So I do think a session shorter than an hour, it just is not doable. So I guess we'll leave it then to see where negotiations can go for Wednesday. And I know it makes complication with another committee, but we'll
Mr.
see.
Chair?
And it's important to try and
Mr. Chair?
convince the Kielburgers for 4 hours tomorrow. That would simplify things. Mr. Polyev.
Listen, we don't want to be unreasonable with the witnesses. I think I speak for my official opposition colleagues in saying that if Mr. Lee prefers to come next week, then we would welcome that. If moving him from Tuesday to Wednesday is hard for him to juggle, given he's a CFO and he has lots of obligations, then out of respect for him, I would be willing to accept him coming sometime next week. We do, as the opposition, offer that olive branch, and I don't know if there's others who want to chime in on that point, but we want to offer that.
Okay, then the clerk has that information. I think preferable to meet as fast as we can. But okay, then where's that leave us now? You were suggesting some other witnesses, I believe.
Yes,
Mr. Polyev, we have the Prime Minister and Chief of Staff, which is in the original motion, and we have Michelle Douglas, which is in the original request.
Yeah.
Where are we at?
So I have another motion.
Sorry, Mr. Polyev, before
Mr. Clerk, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, before we get going, I just wanted to mention that the Ethics Committee has not yet scheduled their meeting for Thursday, so they will adjust to make sure that we're not meeting at the same time as them, just for members who had concerns about that. And then I just wanted clarification, because technically the motion regarding Mr. Lee wasn't officially moved. We discussed it, but I would like to include something in the minutes.
Okay,
so is there general? Yeah,
I'll
if
move
you
something
could.
on that. So just to simplify, so to avoid having you go back and forth, why don't we just say the following: that the committee invites Victor Lee to appear between August 3rd and August 7th. That gives him inclusive for no less than 2 hours.
Could we have agreement on that rather than necessarily going to record it to a vote, or could we say in case he might want to make himself available on Wednesday, do we want to open that up between now and August 7th or whatever your final date was?
Chair, I think we should just make it for next week. There's so much going on, so many moving parts. I think we just do it next week.
I see Mr. Julian's head's shaking as well. Is there then general agreement on that? Any opposition? Okay, that's where we're at. It'll give you some direction, Madam Clerk, and
you.
other witnesses, Mr. Polyev
Yes.
or Mr. Julian.
So the next, I have a motion as well that the committee, originally we had limited our preliminary examination to just 4 meetings. Of course, that will be, we all now agree that is insufficient. The Prime Minister himself has asked to testify in a meeting that would be in addition to the 4 already held. So what I would suggest then is that we extend our study, and I propose the following motion: that the Finance Committee continue to hold hearings until the list of witnesses committee members submit is exhausted, and that the subcommittee convene to discuss scheduling of meetings for said witnesses to attend. What this basically says is that members of the committee are invited to bring forward a list, as is the normal practice, and that we'll convene a subcommittee, I don't know, early next week in order to schedule the proper timing. It might be wise to have a bit of a breather so that members can absorb the testimony that they're going to receive this week. There's also a commitment from the clerk of the Privy Council to release additional documents. Those documents committee members might want to read those documents before deciding what hearings to hold. But the purpose of this motion is simply to keep the study alive and to open the door for for committee members to submit their witnesses through the clerk, so that she can begin working to schedule them, and the subcommittee can convene informally, as it always does, in order to set up those hearings. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Fraser, but and then Mr. Julian. But I want to come back to Mr. Lee for a moment. If he offers to come this week, can we accept him?
I think my motion has been adopted already on that.
Well, it wasn't a motion, but it was kind of an agreement. But if he's completely tied, I know we are. But if he's completely tied up next week and offered to come this week, is that doable?
I don't think so. I think we've just got. I think we've got too much going on this week, and I think we should get, out of respect to Mr. Lee, who said that he's very busy this week, we should just.
All right, that's an issue then behind us. I'll go to Mr. Fraser, Mr. Julian, and Mr. Fragiskatas on Mr. Polyev's last proposal.
So look, there's a lot to take in here, and I think I can even tell by some of Mr. Polyev's conservative colleagues kind of laughing along as he's making these points that there may and now shaking their head that I've said that we should do our best just to be a reasonable human being here. And if somebody can get through the testimony now, that's fine. I find it ironic that on the one hand, there's an opposition to limiting some meetings, extending others. There seems to be a bit of a conflict. The other piece that's grating away right now on me is I think it's patently ludicrous to have just an absolutely unlimited meeting length. I've only been here 5 years, Mr. Chair. You've been here probably as long as I've been walking. I don't think you will have ever seen a committee meeting that has just dragged on indefinitely with as many witnesses as anybody wanted. I by no means am trying to close things down prematurely. I supported the study of this meeting, support the Prime Minister testifying, supported a full document production. I want to continue to be transparent. At a certain point in time, I think we need to give our head a shake and realize that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to pose the greatest threat that our species has potentially faced in my lifetime, with the exception of perhaps climate change. And I don't want to waste months and months, or even frankly, weeks and weeks beyond what is actually necessary to figure out what we need to figure out, when we can actually be turning our mind to how we are going to best support Canadians, not only to get through the continuing public health emergency, but to get back to work, grow the economy, and improve the quality of life for the people that live in my community. I know that there is some interest in the story at hand. I think we should continue to have witnesses testify that have something important and unique to say. The idea that we will just have as many witnesses forever as anybody who's attending this meeting should like is a bit over the top in my mind. And I hope colleagues will not break on partisan lines on this one and actually just ask yourself whether it's reasonable to have an unlimited number of witnesses. I think the answer is clearly no.
Mr. Julian, and then Mr. Fragascatis, I believe it was, and then Mr. Cooper. Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's nothing here that talks about unlimited list of witnesses. In fact, what this motion speaks to is having the subcommittee, which, you know, Mr. Chair, is fundamental to scheduling witnesses, having that subcommittee meet and to define where are the witnesses, what the timing is, etc. I mean, the reality is 3 weeks ago, I brought forward the motion for documents on July 7th, and we have had stunning revelations over the last 3 weeks. So we do have an important job to get to the bottom of this and get answers. What Mr. Poilievre and I disagree on a whole lot of things, but the idea that we end basically tomorrow, which was the original scheduling that we decided on as a committee, I think would be doing a disservice to the Canadian public. There are tons more questions that have arisen in the last 3 weeks. What Mr. Poilievre is proposing is extending the study under the agreement, if you like, or under the structure that is set up by the subcommittee. That's the way it should go. And I'm not sure why Mr. Fraser is objecting so vehemently. It's certainly not an open book. What it is the subcommittee getting together and structuring witnesses. And then, of course, Mr. Chair, we've got the documents that we should be getting by August 8th. And hopefully, we've gotten some of those documents. Others will be coming forward. That'll give the subcommittee the opportunity to decide how we move forward on this. I'm a member of the Finance Committee. I'm very disturbed by some of the revelations we've had around this scandal over the last few weeks. But I'm also working on behalf of my constituents and the pandemic, and also pushing hard, as the NDP has, on improving the government programs that were brought forward. And I think there's a long list of policies and programs that the NDP and Jagmeet Singh, as our leader, have been able to force the government to accept. So we can do more than one thing at a time. There is no doubt that we can't end the study tomorrow, which is basically what the motion that we adopted on July 7th does. And so we do need to extend it. There are tons of unanswered questions. Let's extend it under the structure that is put in place by the subcommittee, which all parties are represented on. And we'll come to a consensus of the subcommittee. And as Mr. Fraser knows, that comes back to the committee ratifies it. This is simply, it's not a blank check, quite the opposite. It's a very structured way of moving forward to get answers to the questions that have not been answered over the last 3 weeks. And of course, over the last 3 weeks, we have tons of more additional questions now as this scandal has unfolded. And Canadians need those answers as well. And that's our responsible job as members of the Finance Committee.
Okay, I have 3 people on my list: Mr. Fragascatis, Mr. Cooper, and then Mr. Fraser, and then Ms. Koutrakis. But I do have to. Normally, Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Julian, we do set some kind of deadline when to be done. Which I think is appropriate as well. A very open-ended motion that could roll on for eternity. Mr. Fragascatis, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Fraser, and Ms. Koutrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I return to the point that I made earlier, and that is that this is not the only committee that's examining this matter. It's being looked at ethics. It's going to be looked at government operations. Let me tell you, this morning I had came into the office, and the first thing I did was answer a message from a new business owner who wanted to know what supports would be available, if any, from the federal government for new entrepreneurs. This individual is working very hard, has come up with a business plan, wanted to put in place a business, and didn't foresee a pandemic. They've gone to the bank. The bank is not being helpful. I'm working with those in government and the very relevant departments to assist this constituent. But the more that we turn committees like this into the We Charity Committee, it means it takes our ability away as MPs from do the work that's expected of us as constituents. I wonder if Mr. Poilievre and the Conservative members on the committee would be opposed to looking at COVID-19 issues and the government's economic response in future meetings. I would hope that's the case. That should be the aim of the Finance Committee. This is not to say that issues relating to We Charity are not important to examine. We have, after all, devoted now 5 meetings to the issue, and Mr. Poilievre wants to keep going. It's not enough, and I understand his position, and I also, I suppose, appreciate when he says that it's good to take a breather. I think he used that term. He said that the committee is doing too much work this week. I'm sure he's very sincere when he wants us to space this out for the well-being of all of us. Or it could be other issues and considerations that are on his mind. Be that as it may. Mr. Chair, I have to tell you that when words like exhausted are used in the motion, as is the case with Mr. Poilievre's motion, that's the problem here. I mean, there's many problems with what he has proposed, but when the word exhausted is used, I get the sense that this is going to now turn into the We Charity Committee, and we will not be able to, as a committee, examine the economic realities facing the country at this time. We have heard from many witnesses at this committee. I'm almost tempted, and the clerk has done a wonderful job, so I'm worried about giving her more work, but I'd love to know the number of witnesses that we've actually heard from. Witnesses that have actually shed a great deal of light as to what happened. The members of the public service in particular, Ms. Kovacevic came a few days ago and gave a compelling account, helped us understand more about this issue. But there have been witnesses who at times, and with all due respect to them, have not really shed a great deal of light, have not been terribly helpful. In fact, have focused on issues completely unrelated to We Charity. I think it's, and I'm not going to name witnesses here, Mr. Chair, but we've seen how that has gone. It has been unhelpful to the goals of this committee and of this particular study. So if we can take out this wording around until the witness list is exhausted, that would be most helpful, because I do not want to see this committee, the Finance Committee, and with all due respect to all MPs, there are those who have made the point, and I think, Mr. Chair, you've made this point to me in the past, that the Finance Committee is among the most important, if not the most important, committees on Parliament Hill. We have an enormous responsibility facing us at this time. We ought to live up to that responsibility on behalf of Canadian workers, businesses, their families. This is not to say, of course, that ethical matters are not important. Of course, they are imperative. That's why we've devoted these meetings to this subject. That is why the Ethics Committee is devoting meetings to this subject. That's why Government Operations is devoting meetings to this subject. I really fail to see what we will get out of having meetings ad nauseum over and over until a witness list is exhausted. Of course, only to the satisfaction of Mr. Poilievre. And one more point, Mr. Chair. We have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, while this issue is important, we can't be distracted from all those issues that I've mentioned before. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Fraser, and Ms. Katrakis. And I do see Elizabeth May's hand up as well. I believe we can let you in on this, Elizabeth. Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me just say, with the greatest respect to my friend, Mr. Fraser and Mr. Fragiscatos, who downplay the seriousness of what we are looking at, Canadians care about ethics and integrity in government. And let's also be clear that this particular program falls within the legislative authority that Parliament had vested in the Finance Minister. So it is perfectly appropriate that this committee is holding hearings to get answers in this matter. And with respect to the motion that has been put forward by Mr. Polyev, it is not open-ended. It is a way to proceed in a way that will allow the committee to call the appropriate witnesses at the appropriate times to get the answers that Canadians deserve. When the initial motion was passed, it provided for 4 meetings. Every passing day, there have been new revelations. And so in terms of what witnesses might need to be called and how much time and how many more meetings are required has yet to be determined until we hear further evidence. Let us follow the facts. Let us follow the evidence. That is what this motion simply provides for. And I find it interesting that the Liberals on this committee are so keen on rushing witnesses all in a week. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that in order for this committee to properly do its job, to absorb the testimony of key witnesses, to be able to formulate questions, to be able to identify inconsistencies, to identify issues arising from testimony, that it's simply not feasible or practical to do that in back-to-back-to-back hearings. So what this motion allows for is our committee to take sufficient time that is required for us to do our job. I know that's something that the Liberal members on this committee are not particularly excited about because, let's face it, the allegations that have come out by the day have become more and more serious. We're talking about $1 billion that was tagged to, or a contribution of $1 billion to an organization that socially, politically, and financially benefited the Prime Minister and his family and the Finance Minister and his family. We're talking about multiple breaches of the Conflict of Interest Act. And so I know that they'd like to overwhelm this committee, they'd like to overwhelm the media, they'd like to overwhelm Canadians to effectively cover up what is in fact gone on. I was there during the SNC Lavalin scandal. I sat on the Justice Committee, and I was there when Liberal MPs using their majority shut down the committee, shut down the ability of the committee to hear from witnesses who were prepared to appear, and they walked out the back door afraid to take questions, afraid to face the media because they knew what they were doing was wrong. Well, the good news this time is they don't have a majority. They don't have the ability to shut down this committee's ability to call witnesses as they did during SNC Lavalin. So I say that to my friends on the Liberal side, that if you really are interested in getting answers, if you really are interested in allowing our committee to be able to do its work, to call the appropriate witnesses, then let's provide sufficient flexibility to do just that, to call the appropriate witnesses based upon the evidence. Let us follow the evidence and let us have sufficient time to do it well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. On the list, I have Mr. Fraser, Ms. Koutrakis, Ms. May, and Mr. Fragascatas. And if I could just throw one thing in, Mr. Cooper, you did talk about appropriate witnesses, and I don't think that's a problem. But at the moment on the original list, we've exhausted the Liberal list, we've exhausted the NDP list, and we've exhausted the Conservative list. And just a reminder to people, August 7th is the deadline for submissions for pre-budget consultations. We usually have 300 to 550 submissions, and then we had to be prepared to have that stuff researched and do hearings on that in the fall and on the restart and recovery from COVID. So my concern is, as long as we get appropriate witnesses and if we've got some kind of deadline that we can work with. Mr. Fraser, Ms. Koutrakis, Ms. May.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And look, though I'm enjoying this discussion, I know Mr. Julian suggested perhaps the ordinary way these things are dealt with is by virtue of the subcommittee, and I feel I can't help but feel that that may have been an appropriate forum for much of today's discussion. Mr. Julian, you've indicated your speech, frankly, I agreed with almost everything you said. Doing this the normal way with the subcommittee, getting the witnesses and establishing how to proceed is not the portion of the motion I objected to. Where I think we have a point of disagreement, and I don't know if you'll come around to seeing things my way or not, was the portion of the motion that discussed each of the parties bringing forward their witnesses and the committee hearing them until every list was exhaustive. In my mind, is in fact an indefinite period of time that will allow one party or another, if they so chose, to put 200 witnesses that may have very limited probative value in their testimony. If the subcommittee wishes to get together and discuss a path forward, that would be a very healthy discussion. If the motion is going to include language that permits, or rather demands the committee hear from every single witness that every member of this committee could put forward, I think we will have created an environment that is frankly ripe for abuse. Mr. Cooper, I take your comments with great respect, and I always find you to be articulate. There is no effort to demean the importance of the issue that is currently before this committee. My experience on this committee since this Parliament has began has been extremely valuable to me. I've been very fortunate to have front row tickets in some ways to the economic emergency response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are two sources of information, three perhaps, that have been as valuable in anything for me to get new ideas that I could use to help influence the government's approach to various policies. Conversations with stakeholders, including in my own community, conversations with MPs from different parts of the country and different parties, and finally, the Finance Committee. It was really an incredible experience for me to learn about things like the needs to invest in the mental health of those who serve on juries in serious trials. It was really valuable to me to learn about the role of the Great Lakes Commission, which I knew very little about before the testimony. And it was very informative to me to hear in a granular level of detail what investments in a green recovery might be able to offer to the future growth of the Canada's employment numbers and environmental and economic health. I could probably list about 200 different examples of testimony that actually I found valuable and was able to have conversations with colleagues about. There is a global pandemic on the go that is going to require our continued attention and a world-class response if we are going to best serve the interests of Canadians. I do not view that position to be mutually exclusive to the idea that the current study before the Finance Committee is also important. Both things can be true at once. My only point is that I don't want this scheduling issue to turn into a forum to have as many witnesses as one party may like for potentially political opportunism rather than substantive probing, which I think has taken place to date, and I agree should have taken place to date. That's why I supported most of the motions that have come before this committee, with perhaps the exception of one motion where my power went out and I lost a connection immediately before a vote, which I would have supported. My only hope is that we can get together and be reasonable human beings, and like virtually every other project, exercise, or initiative I've ever been a part of, try to figure out how long this should properly take, try to figure out where the real information should come from, so we can focus on the issues at hand rather than background noise that will just confuse the issue, perhaps for the purpose of keeping it in the newspapers, when there's actually an emergency we need to respond to. I would pray that the committee members who I've enjoyed my time with would share my desire to actually advise the government on what policies it can implement as part of the effort to build back our economy in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I promise you, Michael, I'm not trying to be tricky. I want to have a solid inquiry through this committee. I think it's been valuable to date. What I do want to avoid is turning it into an exercise that is something other than a probative exercise, which will detract from our ability to advance policies that are going to keep roofs over heads and food on the table.
Okay, on my list, and I just added, I see another one hand up. I have Mr. Katrakis, Ms. May, Mr. Fragiskatis, Mr. Gabriel, Mr. St. Marie, and Mr. Polyev. And then hopefully we can end the discussion there. Mr. Katrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to repeat many comments that I've heard here from all my colleagues on this committee, no matter the party. We all agree that this is a very important issue. We need to ask the important questions. The Canadians expect us to ask the important questions and to get the answers that they deserve to hear. But this is the Finance Committee. As far as I know, we have heard testimony in the past, monies have not been spent. We are in the steepest economic decline in history, and hopefully a robust recovery is around the corner. As important as we is, I think our economy and how Canadians are doing is far more important at this time. We have to focus on the pandemic. We don't know what's around the corner. We have heard our senior health officials, not only in Canada, but worldwide, there is a second wave that will come upon us. As the very important work that we do as a finance committee, we have the pre-budget consultation meetings coming up. As everyone knows, this is my first mandate as a member of parliament, and I'm very honored to be a member of this all-important committee on finance. I have learned a lot from everything that I've been exposed to from my own colleagues in my own party and my colleagues across the way. I can't imagine how we should be spending all of our time and effort on this very important issue. And again, I echo many of the comments. This is an important issue. I'm very happy that the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff will be before us this week to answer questions to us. But I don't want us to just focus on the one issue, which is We Charity at this time. I think for myself, I've started to schedule very important meetings with my constituents. I've started to hit the terrain with my mask and with my team, and it is so lovely to visit them and to hear how important all of the government programs that we've rolled out have been up until today. And I have to tell you, I monitor my emails very carefully, and in my own writing, I have not received one email saying that this is the most important issue of the day. What I have received from my constituents is how happy they are to see me, to reach out to them. They are happy how my team is helping them during this difficult time. They are happy to see that I'm going to visit them and start to learn more about them and their needs. Nothing would make me happier, and I think I can speak for my colleagues on the Liberal Party. We're looking for answers as well, but can we take a balanced approach? Can we take a step back and say, what is the most important issue right now? Where should we be focusing most of our efforts? Is it really only we, or should we perhaps be doing more meetings to see, are we in the right place? Are we doing the right things to help our small business people to help the mothers that need to report back to work? Do we have the affordable childcare that women need? You know, I happen to be in a province in Quebec where we do have affordable childcare in place. We should be talking about those issues. I'm not saying again that we should not be asking the all important questions where We Charity is concerned. And I'm very much looking forward to listening to We Charity and their testimony. But I just want to make sure that we don't forget about all the other issues that are very, very important, and we should not diminish our role as the Finance Committee. And let's please be reasonable. Let's all be reasonable and make sure that we're taking a well-balanced approach to this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. May, and then Mr. Fragascatis, and then Mr. St. Marie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to colleagues. As I've been listening to all this, I was thinking, you know, looking for evidence around the We Charity scandal did get us the evidence of Global Medic and Rahul Singh. And I want us, and of course, I'm not a member of this committee, I can't vote, but please be mindful of his evidence that the summer is going by. He's got hundreds of people who were ready to participate in the program when it was going to be run by we. Now it's run by nobody. I think we have an obligation to keep our eye on the ball as parliamentarians to make sure young people get the opportunities they're still entitled to. So I was very impressed with a lot of the evidence we've heard while looking into the We Charity issue. But I don't want us to forget the people that are caught in the crosshairs of a big juicy scandal. And that's a lot of young people and NGOs like Global Medic. As for your motion, Mr. Pierre Poilievre, Pierre, I'm not going to be able to vote on this, but when the word exhaustion is used, I just urge all colleagues to remember that at some point the public appetite for this will be exhausted. Keep an eye on that, because they're going to get very frustrated if they see parliamentarians more interested in scandal than interested in helping them. This is a big issue and needs to be thoroughly and properly investigated. I would not want to appear to say that this is not a subject of importance. The fact that the Prime Minister is testifying to this committee underscores that we all understand the gravity of the situation. Major ethical breaches occurred. But just be mindful of where the public sense of what we do as parliamentarians shifts from good for them to getting to the truth to what the heck is wrong with them. Don't they see we're in a pandemic? It's advice you probably don't want. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. May, Mr. Fragascatis, then Mr. St. Marie, then Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Fragascatis.
As I find myself, Mr. Chair, so often, here's another case where I agree with much of what Ms. May said. Not everything, but there's a great deal there, a great deal of substance, as always, from our colleague. Mr. Chair, here's an email I received from a constituent just a few days ago. It relates back to the points I was making earlier about the importance of staying focused on the main thing. Obviously, We Charity is quite critical. We're not denying that at all. I'm not opposed to extending our study beyond the original mandate, so the original mandate being 4 meetings, of course. But the main thing facing this country, the main thing facing our constituents right now is COVID-19. So here's an email from a constituent, and I won't read the whole thing, Mr. Chair, but I'll read the part that stood out the most and that moved me the most. It says as follows: my rent is average for London rent prices, and even still, once I pay rent, I have nothing left to spend on my other bills. This means I have to rely on the food bank. What can you do to lower my rent to an affordable amount? I need to stay where I am to maintain my health. My doctor would gladly confirm this. So I get emails like this on a very regular basis these days, as I'm sure we all do, Mr. Chair. This one particularly stood out. It's heartbreaking. Of course, I want to help this man in every way that I can. I don't have that ability. I mean, there's some things I can do. There's many things I can do, but I cannot create a new reality for him as much as I would like. But what we can do as a committee, what we can do as parliamentarians, is be serious about the work at hand. We've heard at this committee very effective, very important, very meaningful testimony in previous meetings. And I expect that once we get to budget deliberations, we'll hear even more about COVID-19 and its impact on the country and what it's doing to the country and how the federal government is responding and how else it could respond. The issue that I have, and I think Mr. Fraser has brought this up, Ms. Koutrakis brought it up. Ms. May eloquently brought it up now. It's relating to the wording of the motion. That's the issue here. We're not trying to get away from probing more the issues relating to we and the challenges that raises for the government. Important questions still need to be answered. But will we even get to those pre-budget deliberations, Mr. Chair, if we go down the path that Mr. Poilievre and his Conservative colleagues are suggesting? Exhaustive carries its meaning is very clear. There's clear consequences to endorsing this motion, ones that would set us back as a committee. I also find it rather peculiar, Mr. Chair, that Mr. Poilievre has put this motion forward. If he is concerned that this committee is not engaged in an exhaustive study of the We Charity issue, then frankly, he's wrong. We are going to hear this week from the Prime Minister of Canada on this subject. Prime Minister of this country is coming to testify at committee and answer questions. This is unprecedented, as Mr. Poilievre, I'm sure, knows. In fact, I know he knows that because on November 6th, he had a chance to vote at that time, November 6, 2013, to vote in favor of Stephen Harper coming to, it was the Access to Information and Privacy Committee, to examine matters relating to the Mike Duffy scandal. Mr. Poilievre voted against that motion. So that said, and I won't exhaust this point, not to use that word over and over. I'm using it now, Mr. Chair, in a different way. But in November 6, 2013, there was a vote in Parliament that said the following: that the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics be instructed to examine the conduct of the Prime Minister's office regarding the payment of Senator Mike Duffy's expenses, that Prime Minister Harper be ordered to appear under oath as a witness before the committee for a period of 3 hours before December 10th, 2013, and the proceedings be televised. Mr. Poilievre voted against that motion in Parliament. He voted against it. And there's a number of other current Conservative colleagues who are sitting in the House now who've also voted against that motion. And I know it was 2013, but it's still relevant because contrary to that approach, this committee and this Prime Minister is going to see something, we're going to see something else very, very different. We have a Prime Minister coming to the committee to answer questions. So if Mr. Poilievre is looking for an exhaustive approach to this issue, we're seeing it play out. We are looking into this matter in great detail. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, but I think we have to be serious about what matters here and the task at hand. We have to stay focused on COVID-19. We cannot push aside matters of ethics. Canadians will have questions, and we ought to look at those issues and make sure that there's not unanswered questions. But when we have this committee, when we have the ethics committee, when we have government operations looking at all those issues, I end with the point that I began with. The emails that I see in my constituency office, these are the reasons I'm a member of Parliament. It's to help individuals that are going through those sorts of challenges. We is an important issue. We should devote more time than the original 4 meetings to it. We are doing that. Not opposed to looking at this in greater detail, but let's not forget what the main thing right now. The main thing is the main thing, and that's COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I have Mr. St. Marie, then Mr. Poilievre, and did I see your hand up, Sean? Mr. Fraser, okay. And I don't know, was there any others? Okay, and that should end our list. I don't want to use the word exhaust. Mr. St. Marie, Gabriel.
Hello, Gabriel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to intervene here to respond to Mr. Fraser and Mr. Fragiskatos and others. Of course, the priority of this committee is to concentrate on the financial considerations that the government must think of, and given the pandemic and the health of the population and our economy in general, which is in trouble. But I want to remind you that during the last election, the public gave a minority mandate to the Liberals to form government. Minority. And here we're in a situation where the government implemented economic programs of an unprecedented scale That was necessary, but all that's very important, and there's a link of trust between the public and the government that has to be maintained. As legislators, as elected officials, we've abdicated far too much power to the government. When there are bills that, of course, are urgent, well, they're not considered in committee the way they used to be. If that had been done, perhaps we would have noticed that the wage subsidy was going to be used by the Liberal Party that doesn't even need it. To me, that breaks the trust with the government. The citizens in my riding talk about that with me, too. So what we're seeing now is that there's a major program, almost $1 billion, that seems to have been given to an organization that had links or major ethical problems. We never should have had to look at this here this summer. A scandal like this, very problematic links. But we're stuck doing this. And why do we have to do it? Why do we have to do it well? Well, because that trust between the public and the government is essential. There's never been so much important spending done by a minority government without legislators being able to play their proper role and analyze what's going on. So that's why, in my opinion, we really have to have a proper analysis of the situation. A proper analysis means that we have to take the time needed to get to the bottom of things, because in my opinion, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and the government gives us no choice. We didn't want to have to do this. I want to come up with better tools that better respond to the needs of the public. We trusted the government, and now this happened. So let's get to the bottom of it. That doesn't mean we're not interested in what's important here. It is essential in order to maintain that trust. I hope that all the colleagues here will agree, and that puts an end to my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. St. Marie. Mr. Poilievre, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I agree with my colleague, Mr. St. Marie. I'd like to point out two things. First of all, the Liberals tell us that they want to talk about other things with regard to COVID-19. There's not a single Liberal on the committee that suggested other sessions, other meetings to discuss COVID-19 between now and the end of the summer. If they were that concerned with discussing COVID-19 at the Finance Committee, they should have proposed some witnesses. They haven't done that. So that's just a distraction. Secondly,
I got two voices, one in English and one in French.
Okay, are you on the French there when you're speaking French, Mr. Poilievre?
I don't know. I have interpretation. Is that what I press? I'm not sure.
Whatever you're speaking, if you're speaking English, make sure you're in the English button. If you're on French, make sure you're in the French.
I see. All right. Je m'excuse.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. So what I just said is that the Liberals are telling us that they want to discuss COVID-19. But there's been no motion from the Liberals to discuss COVID-19. What they're really proposing is that we do nothing for the rest of the summer. So saying now that they want to discuss COVID-19 at the Finance Committee is just an excuse so that they don't have to discuss the accountability of the government regarding the WE scandal. Secondly, we parliamentarians gave enormous spending power, almost unprecedented spending power to the government in response to COVID. It was that power that the Liberals deployed in order to have this contribution of over $500 million to this organization. and they paid for this great vacation for the Minister of Finance. So it's up to us to be accountable for spending by the government in accordance with the powers given by Parliament in response to COVID-19. Thirdly, members of the committee seem to object or oppose the use of the word exhausted. Let me remind the committee that the moment the majority of the members of the committee decide that there is no more reason to discuss the issue or to continue the examination, that majority can vote to close the study. That's normal. So if witnesses have nothing left to say at some point, the committee can simply decide to shut down the study at that point. There is nothing in my motion that prevents that. It simply gives members of the committee the opportunity to put forth their witnesses and to have all voices heard. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that, folks. I have Mr. Fraser on my list, and that should wrap it up, and we'll see where we can go here.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. First, in response to Mr. Poilievre's commentary, should others wish for this committee to sit and study things related to the economic recovery, I would be more than pleased to do so. I think he'll appreciate, given his experience in this role as a member of Parliament, sitting on numerous committees, that it is atypical for the standing committees to sit when the House is adjourned for the summer months. He can rest assured that as a local representative and the Finance Minister's Parliamentary Secretary, my work on this issue has continued literally on a daily basis through this summer. It doesn't take place exclusively before this committee. Should the rest of the committee wish to supplement the work that I do and the government is doing over the course of the summer, I think it would be an honest value add. I think taking different voices from different perspectives will help inform this process. Mr. St. Marie, thank you as always. I find your submissions valuable and interesting. I don't disagree with you that it's important that there's a public trust between the government and its citizens. The only point that I have an objection to, which I think Ms. May very professionally outlined, was the fact that this is unusual to have a motion suggesting that there be no limit to a list of witnesses that the committee must exhaust. Madam Clerk, perhaps if we could bring this discussion to a head, if you could repeat the motion that's actually on the floor, I'd like to propose an amendment, and it'll be interesting to me to see if committee members will dig in and insist whether in fact this committee must exhaust every single witness that any member of every party proposes in contravention of the ordinary practices of this committee. So Madam Clerk, if I could invite you to read the motion on the floor so I can fine-tune the amendment as we go.
Madam Clerk.
So in English,
please.
That Finance Committee continue to hold hearings until the list of witnesses committee members submit is exhausted, and that the subcommittee convene of meeting for witnesses to attend.
Excellent. I wish I had this in writing in front of me. It would make the exercise perhaps easier. But
did you want me to repeat it again?
If you could. I'm struggling because the pen I picked up has also run out of ink, if I can be frank. But give me a moment and I'll have you read it again. Please go ahead.
So I'll go even slower. That Finance Committee continue to hold hearings until the list of witnesses committee members submit is exhausted, and that the subcommittee convene to discuss scheduling of meeting for witnesses to attend.
Perhaps I will move an amendment to the motion on the floor such that the amended motion would read that the Finance Committee continue to hold hearings and that the Steering Committee convene, and just finish the motion as it was there. The effective change is to only delete the middle portion, which insists that all witnesses from every party be exhausted before this study conclude, which I believe is in accordance with the point that the member from Saanich Gulf Islands has made, though regrettably in this instance, she's not a voting member of this committee.
Okay. Is it seen as a friendly amendment, Mr. Polyev, and we meet as a subcommittee on, say, Friday? Go ahead.
I just need to, I didn't actually hear the motion, the amended motion, the motion as it's now proposed to be amended in its totality. If there's a way that the clerk could read that, then I could make sense of what's being proposed.
What we'll do is ask the clerk to read the original motion and then read the amendment, if we could, either Mr. Fraser or Madam Clerk. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Would it be preferable maybe for me to read the motion as amended if it were to be adopted?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yes,
okay.
Please.
So if it were to be adopted, the motion would read that Finance Committee continue to hold hearings and that the subcommittee convene to discuss scheduling of meeting for witnesses to attend.
Okay.
And I'd suggest if it were to carry, Mr. Polyev, I would suggest we have that subcommittee meeting on Friday so as to give the clerk enough time to start inviting witnesses for next week. We have as witnesses now the Kielberger brothers for 4 hours, Mr. Lee next week, PM and Chief of Staff on Thursday, and then we could prepare the list for on Friday and give time to get the witnesses invited.
Okay. I think we just have a debate on the amendment. Let members jump in. I'd be curious to hear what the other opposition members think of it.
All right. So on the amendment, folks, Mr. Julian first, and then Mr. Fragiskatis. Mr. Julian.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, that this the amendment goes in the same sense as the original motion. I mean, what it does is extend committee hearings, gives that ability to the steering committee to do the scheduling and to map out how things are going to look in the coming weeks. And that is always subject to committee approval. So I don't actually see a huge difference at all. I think that it's the same substance. The concern here is moving beyond the original study. 3 weeks ago, we set up a study. A lot has happened since then. A lot of revelations have come out, as Mr. Cooper mentioned. And so what this does is allow the steering committee to bring back a plan to the main committee and for the main committee to adopt it. So I'm quite frankly fine either way. And I think if we can get a consensus around the amendment, then that's good moving forward as well. You'll recall, Mr. Chair, the original motion that the NDP brought forward and the original motion that Mr. Polyev brought forward, both were adopted with the support of members from all four parties on the committee. So that's that kind of collaboration is important. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fragiskatis, did you want in Mr. St. Marie as well? I didn't see your hand there. Do you want in? Okay, no. Okay, Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I have no problem with what Mr. Fraser has suggested to the committee. Certainly, it will give a bit more work to the subcommittee, but and I can say that because I sit on the subcommittee, Mr. Chair. Mr. Julian's there, Mr. Polyev's there. Your suggestion about a Friday meeting is a good one, and you know it gets us past this original problem about the word exhaustive. because I legitimately believe that that would have stood in the way of the committee carrying out important work on matters relating to COVID-19. This motion allows for analysis, further analysis of the We Charity issue, but in a way that is not prohibitive of the committee's wider mandate, which is to examine economic matters relating to Canada. So no, I'm very much in favor of what's been proposed.
Okay, Ms. Kotrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in favor of this proposal as well. I think it's an efficient way to work this through and get to, what my colleague, Mr. Polyev, recommended, his motion. I think it's an efficient way to get to it meets the objective.
Okay. Do we have Mr. McLeod? I was going to ask, do we have a kind of consensus here to go ahead with the proposed amendment?
I think we can just make it a friendly amendment. I'm fine with it.
Okay. Mr. McLeod, did you want to speak?
Mr. Chair, I think Pierre just canceled my reason to speak.
Okay.
But I wanted to make a couple points. First of all, I think some of this discussion that happened today maybe should have been handled by the subcommittee, and maybe we could have had a more organized strategy going forward. I was wanting to suggest, and I had planned to suggest, that we remove the exhausted list of witnesses off the motion.
Yep.
We have the Prime Minister coming in front of the committee. We have the Government Operations Committee studying this. Ethics is also doing it. But I just want to, many people have said this, but we are in the middle of a pandemic, and having unlimited meetings and just going on and on for the sake of going on and on, I think is going to become repetitive. I think if there's more information people want to bring to the surface or try to bring to clarity on, I think that's fine. But in the meantime, I'm still very concerned that we don't have a program in place for supporting the young people. And that is something that, for me, is very important. And I'm hoping that that is something we'll be able to focus on too.
Okay, do I see any disagreement? Mr. Polyev has seen this as a friendly amendment. We don't need to vote on it if everybody's in favor of basically what Mr. Fraser and Mr. Polyev together have opposed. Okay, I see agreement on that, and we will call a subcommittee meeting if it can be arranged for Friday. To give time to the clerk to get her work done as well. Is that it?
I have another motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
And
before,
I think this
sorry,
one.
before we move,
before we move
on,
motion. Yeah, go
I just
ahead.
want to make sure we have agreement then on the Mr. Poilievre's motion as amended.
Yes.
Without a recorded vote, we agree?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
All agreed. Mr. Polyev.
Okay. This one should be less controversial, that all witnesses who have and will appear release all written communications, texts, emails, all messenger service app communications, and any other means of communications that they have had since March 1st, 2020 with Craig Kielburger, Mark Kielburger, and anyone else with the We Charity or any organization of which Craig and Mark Kielburger hold ownership, management, or directorship positions.
Okay, you're going to read it another time. That is one of the difficulties with virtual when we don't have the writing in front of us. Fairly slow, if you could, Mr. Polyev.
Sure, it is, and I'll just tell my staff here to email this motion to clerk. Okay, so that the clerk will have it in writing. That all witnesses who have and will appear release all written communications, open bracket, texts, emails, messenger service app, and any other means of communication close bracket, that they have had since March 1st, 2020, with Craig Kielberger, Mark Kielberger, or anyone else involved with the We Charity or any other organization of which Craig or Mark Kielberger hold ownership, management, or directorship positions.
Okay, it's up for discussion. Mr. Fraser, do I see any other hands? Mr. Fraser, Ms. Zerowitz, Mr. Julian, and Mr. Fragiskatis. Mr. Cooper, were you up too? Okay, Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a couple things that a couple concerns I've got, and a couple pieces of information I think I'm going to want. And I again, not having some of these things in writing in advance does make it challenging to deal with on the fly. So first, before I got into politics, I was in litigation. I think Mr. Morantz is a fellow lawyer, Mr. Cooper as well. Practiced out west mostly. I probably would have bumped into Cooper had I stayed a little longer, and if we both of us never chose this profession. One of the things that I always found immensely frustrating was when there would be an exercise to essentially conduct a fishing expedition rather than have a targeted and reasonable approach to get information that is actually likely to have value to the matters at hand. I can't assess on a moment's notice which of the two approaches this motion actually constitutes. And I wouldn't mind having time to conduct that analytical exercise on my own. But Madam Clerk, I'm wondering if you can point to the language that was used in the earlier document production motion so that it is not simply a duplicative effort to get at more information for the sake of simply having the exercise drag on. If there's more information that needs to come out with respect to the matters at hand, then I don't have a problem having that information be part of this committee's assessment and analysis. But I do want to avoid what appears to be a continued effort to just throw more at the wall over and over and over in an exhaustive way, not to double down on that word yet again. So I'm curious, Madam Clerk, if you actually have access to the previously adopted document production motion, which we've supported and has now been passed by this committee.
Yes, I've got it in front of me. I can read it out. It was adopted on July 7th. So it says the committee order that any contracts concluded with We Charity and Me to We, all briefing notes, memos, and emails from senior officials, including the contribution agreement between the government and the organization, prepared for or sent to any minister regarding the design and creation of the Canada Student Service Grant, as well as any written correspondence and records of other correspondence with We Charity and Me to We from March 2020 be provided to the committee no later than August 8th, 2020.
And just so I can contrast the two, and I'm always somebody who's learned better with sort of paper in front of me. One of the things that I'm trying to discern a difference between is the new motion, and Pierre, maybe you can answer this unless the clerk has the language right there. Are we dealing with things like just private communications, or is this stuff that touches on the Canada Student Service Grant? It seems a bit odd. There's some concern as well that I have, although I wasn't present for this particular testimony. I believe we had a journalist appear before the committee as well, which I have some questions around in its own right. But I'm curious if you'd be looking for things from journalistic sources and the like. I think there might be more difficulty here than meets the eye on first blush. And I'm just curious whether the clerk or Pierre would care to shed a little bit of light on that. That would be something that I'd need to sort out before I can have an informed vote on this particular motion, which strikes me as a bit much, but I'm willing to listen.
Okay, can I come back to Mr. Polyev on that question and then on to Ms. Zerowitz? Do you want to answer that question, Mr. Polyev? What's it related to in terms of, I guess, individual privacy concerns as well?
So it's related to the origin of the entire Canada Student Service grant, and that's really, one of the essential mysteries of this entire saga. Where did this strange and exotic program come from, given that we already have a Canada Summer Jobs program that could very easily have funded the creation of additional positions for students at charities and nonprofits across the country? What on God's green earth would have compelled the government to completely duplicate that existing program and then farm it out to a third party that just happened to have paid the Prime Minister's family 300 grand and happened to have taken the finance minister on a $41,000 vacation? And the government, continues to imply, without saying it, that it was the public service that came up with this idea. They imply it by saying that, well, the final recommendation came from the public service. Well, I have no doubt the government's going to be able to produce some document somewhere that shows that after weeks and weeks and weeks of insisting by political staffers, ministers, that the bureaucrats, somebody in the bureaucracy was forced to put their name on a so-called recommendation to create this strange program and direct it to this particular embattled organization. But we need to know if how this all came about and what conversations led to its genesis. So now the reason that I'm not circumscribing the kinds of communications to mention of the Canada Student Service Grant is because we've seen how Jesuitical the government can be. And for example, we had the Minister of Diversity come before this committee and say, I did not discuss the Canada Student Service Grant with we at any point ever. And, we left all thinking that she had not been in contact with the group. Well, we learned a day or two later in the Muse report, she had spoken with the group. She spoke with Mr. Kielberger directly, but they didn't talk about something that at that time was called the Canada Student Service Grant. So the term, the words Canada Student Service Grant were not used in that particular order. And therefore she thought cleverly that she could say she never discussed that issue with them. This grant experienced a very slow development of its branding over many weeks. So it is entirely possible that there will be all kinds of communication that led to its creation that doesn't mention the grant itself. And so it would not be appropriate simply to limit the committee's request to communications where the program entitled Canada Student Service Grant was mentioned, but rather just to limit it by time. I'm not interested in hearing, seeing every text message that, Craig Kielberger has had with every minister going back a decade. But in this critical period where this program went from unthinkable to imagined to supported to named to funded to retroactively granted, that chronology needs to become known. And that's why I put forward this motion to make it known. So I would be, Mr. Fraser is concerned that, journalistic communications might get caught up into this. I would be prepared to say that all government witnesses, including exempt staff. So that would deal with his concern. So it would just be a friendly amendment right after the word all and before the word witnesses, that all government witnesses, including exempt staff, who have or will appear, release, who have or will appear, release all written communications, open bracket text, so on and so forth.
So
Okay, then I will go to, I have Ms. Sirowitz, Mr. Julian, and Mr. Fragiskatis. And I have to ask the clerk a question where it says all witnesses who have or will appear before the committee.
Or will, yes.
Or
Should read
will.
or will.
Or will. I mean, that's going retroactively. I'll have to ask the clerk for advice on this. Is that motion in order in terms of going retroactively? I'll give the clerk a little time to think about it because witnesses have appeared in good faith. And now we're going to retroactively go back and say, look, you've got to provide all your correspondence. It gets into, in my mind, maybe in privacy issues. Ms. Sirowitz, then Mr. Julian.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just say that the motion that we are currently functioning under the original finance motion is the following. As part of our study on COVID-19, we hold hearings in July 2020 for no less than 4 meetings for duration of 3 hours, each to examine how much the government spent in awarding the $912 million sole source contract to We Charity and how the outsourcing of the Canada Student Service Grant to We Charity proceeded as far as it did, and that the committee produce a report of its findings to be tabled in the House of Commons. And then there was a list of witnesses. And I just want to say that was our mandate. Now it's starting to feel with this additional motion. And again, I'm like Mr. Fraser. I need to see it in front of me to kind of really absorb it. But it's now starting to feel like it's an investigation into the Kielburgers or an investigation into the We Foundation. And I feel like we're now starting to get away from what we were mandated to do, which is how much money did we spend on this? Was there any financial mismanagement? And how did we reach this decision? So was there any funny business around how we actually reached this decision? There's a ton of data that's coming our way. And the clerk, I want to say thank you so much for reading that slowly and very accurately. Thank you for that. And then I'd also like to remind everybody that every single witness that we have asked for additional information has indicated absolutely that they would forward the information. So I'm starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable about what exactly we are asking for at this point. I also just wanted to respond to Mr. Poilievre's statement that that we are implying that there was no involvement by the Prime Minister or by any of the ministers in directing our civil servants to actually select We. What I'd like to put on the record is that it's actually our public service that have clearly articulated that it was them that actually suggested and put forward We Charity as the recommendation and the selection to deliver the CSSG program based on the limited amount of time they had to deliver, to come up with a group who'd be able to deliver it. So we had that confirmed by our clerk of our Privy Council, Ian Shugart. We have also had that confirmed by Gina Wilson, our Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth. And it was stated by our Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Skills and Employment Branch, Rachel Warnick. So there is zero evidence of anything to the contrary that we have heard so far, that there was any minister, any prime minister, anybody within our cabinet that might have directed any public servant to actually only select We Charity as the charity to deliver the Canada Student Service Grant. So quite honestly, Mr. Chair, I am not understanding what this additional, the value of this additional information. I would agree. Maybe I might not have any issue. Maybe I need to kind of look at the statement of what is being proposed, but it just feels like we're starting to move into something more personal, away from what our original intention was before this committee in terms of investigating the financial spending on this contribution agreement, as well as how the decision to select We Charity to deliver the Canada Student Service Grant actually transpired. And those are my comments for the moment, Mr.
Okay,
Chair. Thank you.
adding Mr. Morantz to the list as well. Mr. Julian, Mr. Fragascatis, Mr. Morantz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with the principle of the motion. The principle is basically extending the motion that we adopted on July 7th. And on July 7th, we specifically referred to memos, emails, and briefing notes from We Charity and Me to We. Now, subsequent to that, and this is where the revelations over the last 3 weeks really should allow us to refine how we're approaching this. First, we found out that the We submission occurred the very same day that the Prime Minister actually announced the program. So it is unlikely that we're going to find briefing notes around this when what essentially happened was a simultaneous announcement of a program and a submission to run the program. Secondly, we found out that it was not a contract signed with We, but rather the We Charity Foundation. And the liability issues, of course, we've been hearing about over the last few days. The liability issues are substantial because of the fact that it was signed with a different entity. And of course, the issue of the Canada Summer Jobs, I think, continues to be relevant. The fact that there was a cutback in the number of positions offered at a time of pandemic when we really needed to see the number of student positions expanded. And many businesses in my neck of the woods here in New Westminster, Burnaby, and right across the country, and many organizations suffered. So I think the intent is a very good one. I think there needs to be a number of changes. I understand having text and emails and messages because we're finding out that it happened simultaneously. So it's unlikely to be the memos, emails, and briefing notes that we talked about originally. I think the complexity of the number of organizations around We and for-profit businesses mean that I believe we need to certainly talk about organizations or for-profit businesses that are connected with the We family, because as we've heard, there's about a dozen different entities, and these weren't covered in the original motion that I brought forward for July 7th. So I think there's a good intent here. I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to come to a consensus for this meeting, but we do have many opportunities now that we've expanded the study and we're having the steering committee meet on Friday. I think there's an opportunity to refine and put forward a motion like this that actually gets us to the heart of many of the questions that have come up since the original research for documents or request for documents was made 3 weeks ago. The ground is different now. We found out many things that we didn't know on July 7th. And so expanding it beyond just the Me to We and the We charity is important, including the for-profit businesses connected with the family. Secondly, ensuring that we have text messages that might well go beyond what is the standard process. There's clearly not a standard process here at all. When you've got a submission coming the same day, when bureaucrats weren't even aware of the details, submission coming the same day as the Prime Minister making his announcement. So I think there's something we can work on. Perhaps committee members want to refine it now, but I also think we have an opportunity in the next few days to come back to this issue, refine it, and adopt the motion that I think folks would be prepared to support. I would be offering some amendments today, but I'm not sure it's necessary to adopt it today. It could be something that we adopt over the next few days.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Your point of order, Mr. Poilievre.
Yeah, I think both Mr. Fraser and Mr. Julian raised some good points. This was a very complicated motion to write precisely because of the octopus-like nature of the we organization, all of the numbered companies, the foundations, the related entities that are part of it, made it very complicated to write a motion that would capture everything we were looking for. So I would invite Mr. Julian and anyone else who wants to work with me over the next day, and perhaps we could, at the end of the testimony from the Kielburgers tomorrow, we could, when they left the stage, we could revisit the motion and have an opportunity to put forward something whose wording is fine-tuned to the liking of committee members. So, and that will save us the time to thrash it out right now. We can just put it aside and deal with it tomorrow.
If you could withdraw the motion then and bring it forward at a later date, I was going to suggest. I mean, I don't want to rule it out of order as yet, at least, but I do think the implications of the way the motion is currently worded is very broad, may get into some privacy issues, may put a chill on witnesses wanting to come before committee if we retroactively ask them to provide any of the correspondence, etc. So I'd like to see it in writing and maybe run it by the law clerk for that matter to make sure we're on fair ground, if I could put it that way. So you're pulling it back, Mr. Polyev, and we'll think about it and bring it forward with maybe a little more clarity to it.
Yes,
is that what I'm
fine.
hearing? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I have another motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we are beyond our hour, but our 2 hours, but I don't think we automatically adjourn. Go ahead.
Yes, with regards to the Prime Minister's appearance and that of Ms. Telford, before I begin my motion, can I seek clarification that Mr. Trudeau and Madam Telford have agreed to appear separately? Is that the status right now?
That is the status right now. The Prime Minister will appear from 3 to 4 on Thursday, and Ms. Telford from 4:15 to 5:15.
Okay. We would ask that the Prime Minister, I put forward the following motion, that the Prime Minister appear for no less than 3 hours alone as a witness on his own panel, that Katie Telford appear for no less than 2 hours alone as a witness on her own panel, that the two appear separately. That's my motion. And the rationale is that this is a large and complicated file. This is a case where the Prime Minister and his family are personally implicated, unlike previous controversies like those Mr. Fraser has mentioned about other governments and other Prime Ministers. This was a case where the Prime Minister's family personally benefited from $300,000 of highly unusual payments. And then the Prime Minister decided to attempt to direct a massive $500 million program to the same organization that had paid his family. If the Prime Minister comes and gives a lengthy opening remark, there won't be much time left for intervention. Now, I will point out that if Prime Minister does not provide us with more than an hour right now, there is a strong likelihood the House of Commons would pass a motion in September to recall him, in which case he would have to testify in person, again, perhaps at the Ethics Committee or depending on what the House says. But there is a majority of opposition members who do have that authority and will likely exercise it. So in the pragmatic interests of the Prime Minister, I'd suggest he simply come now and give a fulsome and complete testimony rather than trying to get in and get out and run out the back door before anyone catches him. He'd be better suited just to come and give a full testimony now and then avoid having to do it over. Do it once, do it right.
Okay, the motion is on the floor. Did I see your hand, Mr. Fraser?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. With respect, there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance that has gone on with the treatment of various different witnesses and a willingness to accommodate their schedules. I only mean to suggest that it's unique to have the Prime Minister be willing to come and testify at all. And I know there was some concern raised, I may have been with respect to either the Kielburgers or Mr. Wee, about the fact that they may or may not have other things on the go with respect to being present for the testimony at a parliamentary committee. I can tell you from personal experience over the past few months, the Prime Minister is working specifically to help rebuild the Canadian economy right now. If we want to invite him for whatever period, that's up to the will of the committee, of course. I would be quite pleased on the basis that he's making himself available at all, quite frankly, which is a deep contrast to the practice of Prime Minister Harper when he was given the opportunity. Of course, this is going to be up to the will of the committee, but my strong preference is to invite the Prime Minister, which we have, and he's now accepted it. I'm quite satisfied with the fact that he's made himself available, which is quite unique for parliamentary committees, to say the least.
Anybody else? I've asked the clerk a question. One of the difficulties of not having the clerk beside me. I've had some emails saying that we need unanimous consent of the committee to continue. Ask the clerk for some advice there. Madam Clerk?
You can always adjourn a meeting, Mr. Chair. That's at your discretion. If you choose to continue, typically, if there's no objection, it's implied consent. So it's kind of up to the committee to decide.
I object.
There's a number of people objecting to the meeting continuing. So I am going to adjourn the
point of order, Mr.
Yep.
Chair. I think I maybe I misheard the clerk. I thought she said that that you could attempt to adjourn the meeting, but that unless someone objected, and I would object to you doing so.
Which way is it, Madam Clerk? If I adjourn the meeting and there's an objection, it can't be adjourned, or if I continue the meeting and there's an objection, which way is it? We got you on the spot, Madam Clerk, rather than me.
It's that we would continue unless there was an objection, and if Ms. Zarowitz objected, then we would adjourn.
Okay, meeting adjourned.